Welcome to Eideias Project, second episode with Dr. Hanna Poikonen. Today we're going to try to talk about art, creative process, and neuroscience. And I'm Aleix Gordo Hostau, an artist based in Barcelona. And Dr. Hanna Poikonen will introduce herself just right away. Just so please.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm focusing on neuroscience, embodiment, and arts in both in the academic field at the ETH Zurich in Switzerland, and then through my own wise motion method, in which I combine neuroscience and movement. So welcome to join today, and I hope you enjoy our conversation.
So I was wondering, how is the blank canvas or black box or silence filled with music, art, painting, theater or dance? And not only that, but taking it even further, that this what is the emptiness, what is filled with these kind of activities or outcome, how is it not emotionally meaningful only for the painter or the artist, but also to the audience who comes into the situation without, in some cases, without any previous knowledge or background information, and they can also emotionally get engaged to that what is produced.
Whoa, that I don't think that the first question, it is probably an eternity, and probably there won't be an answer that will be plausible for all the cases. The second one is most likely about you presuppose that the artist, all the artwork, whatever it is that is produced by an artist, it's meaningful to him or her, and that there is a direct link that is emotional to the piece, which is not to start with, especially in the painters, because the production of, or the architects, like you try to control what the audience would feel with the piece, but that is not necessary for you to interpret it in a way or perform it in a way that you have the same color of emotion. Maybe it helps with singing, for example, or like music. That could be okay. But imagine a painter painting a canvas for a month, that it's obliged to have the same color of emotion for a month while it is painting it. Imagine like there's a terrifying image in a canvas, and this person has to feel that terrifying emotion for a month. So I think that many audience think that artists have some kind of emotional color while they do their artworks, and I don't think so. We use what is called like technique.
Yeah, and I think there are different parts which we can later on talk about the neuroscience related to that, but different parts in the creative process. So you were talking about this like terrifying emotion, so maybe the artist had very intense terrifying emotion, which was kind of like the kick for the art piece, and this like short moment was used as an inspiration for the art piece. But then when actually executing or making the art piece, then of course the emotional state might need to be different, because if you are in this full feeling of fear or anxiety, it might be impossible to perform.
Or not, because we presuppose that some of the artists dominate the technique to express such a terrifying image, so that he or she can recognize a terrifying image that he or she had previously had, and through the full domination of the technique can produce such an image that the audience can perceive as such. But sometimes it's just like a matter of the opposite. They just don't know how to do something, and they end up producing a terrifying image, or which is true at the end.
Yeah.
And
It just reminds of like my starting painting.
That could be, yes. That could be one of the
one of the examples. But what I found interesting from the neuroscientific point of view is that like when we study the creative process, we notice that there are different kind of mental states, and I often talk about this neural network of the internal world, which is related to this like very calm, like let's say daydreaming kind of mental state, when let's say like kind of very distant associations can be brought together. So in a way, we can never really reach our unconsciousness, but there is material which comes maybe momentarily into our consciousness from our unconsciousness, and there will be like a certain neural network which is called the default mode network. I prefer to use the neural network of the internal world, but this will be active, and what is typical for this neural network, it's active when our arousal state is low, so when we are very calm, like or even almost asleep, and our heart rate is very low. So
but how is that possible for a punk rocker, for example, on a stage with 10,000 people in audience?
That was just one of these neural networks which would be related to the creative process, and I think punk rocker as well. Well, yeah, maybe they end up into the flow state and kind of like ecstatic state during the concert, in which also
but that we presuppose that like in order to create there has to be this ecstatic state, which I don't.
Not really, because then there's another neural network, or that's kind of a collection of other neural networks, but they're more related to, for example, attentional processes and how we interact with the environment. So the previous one, the neural network of the internal world, is more like introspection, how we look inside, and for that you need like a lower state of arousal. And then for this, like what I like to call the neural networks of the external world, that's when the arousal state is more up and you're really attentive with the environment and interacting with that. So I could imagine, like for example, a punk concert, they go into that state, that they're really like observing what happens with the group, what happens with the audience, what happens with all the lights and the sounds, and they get very alert and aroused with that, and then they just
but I think that there is another factor in these, what you are kind of defining through different neural systems. A musician, like that is a good example. He or she knows exactly what the song is about. They have rehearsed that song a million times, or each of the components of the group, they know exactly the technique of their instruments, including the voice, right? So they can afford to flow with some certain freedom with the tools they already know perfectly. So they can be both like these things that artists get into a trance state. I don't think it is possible, because you are attached to a tool in which is definitory on what you're actually doing. So you can't really let it go. If you let it go, then the art disappears, because in the even Pollock, which was an abstract expressionist, he wasn't let it go anything. On the contrary, he was a control freak of the movement he was doing with the paint, and that's why he invented some sort of patterns on the abstraction he was doing. It is not like, maybe it's postmodern, the conception of that letting yourself go, so forgetting all sort of technique, then go into a full trance, whatever that is, might be considered art.
But then I think what lies there underneath, because now we were talking about the actual act of like a punk concert or painting a piece, but what happens there underneath is this years and years of practicing, like even the motor skills, like you need to really practice them and make them really fine, and also the collection of images or sounds depending what's your field. So you have kind of, if you have done your homework, if you have created this collection into your imagination, into your internal world, then you have this material what to kind of play with on the moment.
Well, that's exactly what I say, and what is the basic unit of creation. So to be able to create for whatever you do, it is knowledge, so that you can improve your associative process, in which you take multiple known stuff that merge into something that hasn't been done yet. So a new creation. That is what creation is, to materialize something that doesn't exist previously. But just because we are a continuum, so we are alive and all our senses are on, most likely, some more or the others, we are able to collect a lot of, let's say, data about our experiences and reformulate them through a technique that actually materializes something that we call creation. And that's the creative process. That's more or less a little answer on the first very question you asked me before.
Yeah, and I think in science rather than they talk about trance, they talk about the flow state, and for the flow state it will be exactly the kind of the requirements. One could say that there is this skill set, so there is really the practical skill, and also, let's say, more ability to enter into this kind of imagination, or also some kind of courage in a way to let go as well. So somehow trusting that the knowledge is there without trying to control it on the moment. So kind of the years and years of experience and hard work, that kind of the confidence is there. And then how you could enter to this flow state is that first, yes, you need the skills on very many different levels, and then there's a moment when you kind of little bit let go the control, and you can just really immerse into the moment.
Yeah, I'm not pretty sure that the 21st century accepts the premise that years of hard work ends up to a virtuous, let's say virtuous understood as the virtue of knowing all the parts that compone, the whole spectrum of possibilities of a technique, let's say. Meaning that just because a lot of things are considered art nowadays, especially on the audiovisual arts, you can let yourself go into a full-on trance or flow state without really dominating absolutely any technique, and that would be considered okay. So the trance or flow state itself nowadays will be considered by some audiences art, in the same way we consider art like the most refined opera in the 19th century.
Yeah, and do you think then, if we think about the continuity of the quality, like if there is a person without this kind of training at the background and without the actual deep knowledge and know-how, do you think that these kind of people could maintain the quality over the years, let's say? Because I think that if, as you described, that person who kind of just enters a flow state and creates out of that without having the background.
Well, if everything is allowed, then the answer is yes. That it's very unfortunate because at least, let's say, early 20th century, the humanity was trying to face the arts to excel in a way, right? In all possible ways, like dominate the verbal structures, the vocabulary and literature, and to play really, really good an instrument, or your own body, to shape your own body to perform whatever dance it is. And it was, art was a really complex thing. Actually, an artist was something precious, because it was a human being who was actually able to do stuff that other human beings couldn't in that field, right? I think that's the difference. You trained yourself to do something not everybody can do. So during the 20th century, there has been some kind of democratization of arts. Well, it's been a democratization of everything in general, which is, it is not essentially bad. But in artistic world, well, it is not essentially bad either, because then for some reason there's much more people who are interested about arts. But at the same time, it creates a lot of fuss between who's someone who really knows what he or she is doing, and people who's just there trying to apparent.
I understand, and that's why I asked the question about how can these people without the deep knowledge, can they maintain the quality? Because I see the same in science nowadays. Everybody talks with science terms, and everybody calls themselves scientists, and most of all neuroscientists, and they have maybe read some newspapers newspaper articles related to that. And the same if we look at in the dance field, it's the same, that then it's kind of everyone who can move, who can dance, and but then I see in these fields that if there is not this years and years of experience, often maybe by coincidence or by being a very genius on the moment, these people without the background, they can create something very interesting once or twice, but then I feel it somehow burns itself out pretty quickly.
Well, that's kind of wishful thinking. I wish it was like this, that it's not a really full-on talented artist that can back that talent over the years. Sooner or later, reality puts him or her into place, let's say. That's what you meant at the end. And I'm not sure, because we have to remember that the arts are now, well, not now, but just for, I think that it's always been like this, that there's the market in it. So we artists in general, we live out of what we create, and we need people to consume or to buy or to appreciate, but we need money to pay our bills like everybody else. And these specific condition creates a full network of people who are interested of you to keep up where you were, just because they have invested in you. So if it really depends on many, many external factors that has nothing to do with art at the end, that your career keeps up in time or not.
And then on the other hand, as we were talking in our previous podcast, we were talking about this safety and willing to maintain the life as it is without changes. So I think that comes to the art as well, that maybe we want the artists to keep producing the same kind of things.
But it's impossible. How many musicians have been famous for just one song? And they never and that song was really, really good.
I have quite a few examples in mind.
At the end, I don't think that there is a rule or a formula of these, and there's no, let's say, something called fair, because there's no, at the end, fair. It's in these contexts, it's kind of a very subjective point of view, because at the end, there are so many variables, and all of them are external, and some are internal in a way that, imagine how many artists, got into alcohol or got a car crash or whatever life traumatic experience, have cut their nice careers. I can mention all the rock stars from the 70s. They all died young from drugs or overdose or alcohol and so on and so on. How would the world have been if Jimi Hendrix would have lived 30 more years that he did?
Then this is interesting question also, because like if I think again from the point
or
of
Mozart, imagine that we'd have had 20 years of a, let's say, fully aware mature Mozart performing for 20 years more that he did. He died when he was 33, I think.
Yeah, which was not so uncommon at that time.
No, well, of course not. But he was, let's say, rich enough and well positioned enough to have some kind of, clean space, healthy, some court doctors and some maids and housekeepers and so on. So he could perform that. So I think he was more like, okay, if there are variables for you to live longer, at that time he had all of them to be able to do. So
but what I find interesting in this, like these examples what you brought out, maybe, or if we look from the neuroscientific point of view, like the creative process, it seems to be very versatile and also very challenging for the mind and for the artist. It's also, I think, because it's so versatile, like again when we look at the brain in creativity and in different parts of the creative process, there are like very different kind of processes required. So I was wondering, like, could it be that it's in a way it's so demanding that it turns out to be exhausting, and then maybe how to calm down from this like huge creations, this huge push, for example after the rock concert, how to manage all this energy what you get from like tens of thousands of people, and also how you immerse with your group and with your instruments. So maybe the alcohol and drugs was like kind of immediate release for this kind of energy which is circulating in you and you know where to put it.
I think it was more of a contextual, like I'm not denying like rock and roll specifically of all times since it was created. There is these alcohols, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like it's let's say go together in a way. But like, do you refer about this exhaustion of the creation and so on? I'm not sure. At the end, I think that this is too Western. This is a very Western perspective in a way, because arts in Japan or China, for example, artists were never taking these. I think it's kind of a Christian thing at the end, like that artists have to suffer and to create in a way. And this is like 19th century romanticism played a huge role in this conception of the artist, the suffering artist, right? Yeah. And I'm not sure that this is essentially correct, meaning that, okay, is there like the suffering scientist, like they're like because all the scientists are as well like creative in a way that they're creating things out of nowhere. Do they suffer? Do they need alcohol and drugs to keep performing? Is that would that be correct? Like,
yeah, and I think if we talk about this kind of problems with abuse of any substance, I think that expands to very many fields, not only in the fields of arts.
No, the minery, like, you can go to a mine and I'm sure like all the miners are full on in alcohol.
Or
so
top level CEO. So
or just like the shop tender,
exactly,
or like or like
so,
anyone who works in a warehouse.
So then maybe also because there are field of art, it has certain kind of interest of media. So then these like, and media loves stories and media loves scandals. So maybe then the abuse of the substance abuse of the artist that comes.
But Van Gogh would have been successful after dying in the way he did, cutting his ear, and the galleries who bought all his works after he died. I mean, or Gauguin, would he have been successful in his lifetime, let's say, if he wouldn't have been, hasn't fight against the elements to go to Polynesia and paint those women in a way that nobody did before? And I don't know. This is part of the legend in a way. Like Cézanne was like apparently even more important than them in their time, but it was really boring.
Yeah, exactly. So then there's the part of this, there's the story also which sells. But I think also what comes with the story is the certain personality traits. So what it has been shown that the creativity goes a lot of, if we talk about these big 5 personality traits, so the creativity goes together with the openness to experience. So then the openness to experience also can be applied not only in making art and immersing into different fields of arts, but also being open for very, very many different kind of experiences.
Yeah, but that thing is not enough, because you can be open for experiences and you need to search for those experiences all the time, all around, everywhere. So you can focus enough to be in a studio working 12-14 hours a day. So that openness to experiences at the end for a painter specifically needs to narrow directly to some kind of obsessive compulsive disorder that sticks us in front of a canvas for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Yeah, which comes to the other like personality characters, like maybe orderliness or conscientiousness, or like the dedication to that what you're doing. So then if these kind of personality traits match, then maybe this kind of matching of the personality traits, maybe these kind of characters would be more likely to choose a career of an artist.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it definitely performing arts or just making art for a living. It's not for everyone. But there are so many artistic fields and branches and ways of performing that if you then add all multiple individual big 5 traits, let's say, it makes an not infinite, but a really big amount of possibilities. Yes, and so I'm not pretty sure there is a creative type or a specific profile that it's easier. Well, of course, like if we compare like Usain Bolt, there's only one, right? There's only one guy who's the fastest man on earth, right? And it has to have some genetic, let's say, he had to have good genes in a way. Otherwise, you just don't make it. This is pretty obvious. You don't. You can.
It's part of the play.
So, and in the case of Usain Bolt, it was a miracle that that guy with those genes was born in Jamaica, who has like probably one of the best athleticism programs in the world, and some kind of like tradition on athleticism. So he had probably the best trainers, someone like him who could afford in countries like Jamaica, for example. And for some reason he could develop himself at that level. So it's a multiple factor, but at the end they're just one Usain Bolt. And if I wanted to, I could apply to be a professional athlete, and maybe I could, but I would never be the fastest man on earth. The thing is that I think that 100% of the population have the capacity to be creative at the end.
Yeah.
And then infinite factors, well, not infinite, but like, let's say a huge amount of variables, internal and external, and some sort of like how all these coexist together in multiple contexts pushes you to artistic career. I mean, there is a statistic in which there was a study, I think it was in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. But it doesn't matter. I knew what the statistic was from my personal experience when I was in the committee of the Catalan Association of Illustrators, professional illustrators, who has now more than 100 years. And they studied like 1,000 people who finished fine arts major, and they followed their careers for 10 years after they finished the university. And it happened to be that only how much was that? I think 0.5% was actually making art for a living after 10 years of finishing the university, right? So that's more or less the...
Yeah, and I think what you said, that like everybody, I think you said everybody can be creative. I think like everybody is, and everyone, I think like being creative, it's let's say very fundamental human character or human maybe even needs, like as we spoke.
Well, it just compulsory because we live new moments all the time.
Yeah.
So we need to be creative to somehow adapt to all these new moments.
Exactly.
Now this moment that we are living exactly now, we had some moments like this, but none of them have been actually done already. Like this conversation has never been done before in this way we are doing now. So my part of my brain, it is being creative at this moment because I'm just creating a conversation. It haven't been done before.
Exactly. And then if we, as what you mentioned, that like every moment is new one. So how do you see that what kind of roles do the routines play? Like if because in some sense, like if they're very strict routines in every day. Because
it takes time to instinct the technique. You can't really expect that you do well if you are super genius. Like we can go back to Mozart if you want. I mean, biographically speaking, Amadeus, the famous film, has nothing to do with Mozart's real life, but it depicts like pretty well how a genius could be. And actually, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. He listens a melody in 2 rooms away from when it's being played, and he memorizes it exactly. And on the time that is when Salieri writes a little piece for the emperor to play it while Mozart is going to be presented to him. So he starts playing it and he's not really good at it. So he somehow hits the piano, the clavichord, that he plays it. And then he got in and he said, that was more or less okay, thank you. And the emperor somehow defies Mozart to play it again, and then he improves it on the way he plays. That is kind of that is a hell of a skill. So that's a genius at the end. He can memorize a whole melody with no effort, and that's the whole movie about actually, right? The genius is very, let's say, unfair. Nature, it's really unfair. But for the rest of the mortals, like me, I need to create routines in order to instinct the technique that technique, it's written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten to have some kind of control on it.
And I think that what is challenging in arts, because if we think about, like, for example, accountants or certain like other people whose work is very monotonic in a way, then it's enough just to master this one skill, and maybe the application of that skill is not that important. It's just that collecting the skill in a routine level is important. But then I feel like in arts and also in science, there's the other level that then you need to apply in a completely new way all these skills, what you've been collecting in a routine life. And then I feel that there needs to be some kind of break breaking or like violation or changing the routine so that there is room for this kind of like new connections to happen.
But I meant routines in a way that you spend a lot of time with the tool that you are gonna use to perform. The routine, it only means that you every day perform whatever you perform. That doesn't mean that you need to repeat like multiple times exactly the same. So it's routine for me, it's not a bad word. For many people, routine, it's like, oh damn, again, like this is the same thing.
Exactly, depends if you like what the routine contains or not.
Well, that's the point. Like you can somehow build some exercises or stuff that you somehow categorize like that in a way that it's not repetitive. So you keep learning in the way on the way you do different things of the same in a way. Like for example, me is drawing. Like me as a visual artist, the basics of everything is drawing. Yeah. And there's like infinite ways to start drawing something. Yeah. And from that, because I can draw anything in any style. Not me specifically. Yeah. Well, I could, but like let's say that I can draw things that I've seen, things that I haven't seen, characters that I've seen, characters I haven't seen, landscapes, objects, abstractions. I can do absolutely whatever I want. And every time that I attempt to draw something, even it's something that I've never drawn before, I'm using the same pencil. Yeah. More or less. Yeah. Yeah. So that is the part of the routine in this equation, let's say. Yeah. Because the rest, it's just like, well, that if you want to say it in a mystic way, I'm just a messenger. Sometimes I don't even know.
Yeah, where you might need to be in this kind of flow state, what we were talking about before, that you are not really trying to produce something specific. It somehow more like flows out of you, as one could say.
Well, but that, I mean, of course, like this word that I'm gonna use, it's kind of definitely not scientific and it's kind of scary. But at the end of like, I've been thinking about this for the past 20 years, and the closest one, it's magic. It is like what happens, why it happens, why am I drawing something, why am I drawing this face in this particular manner without really thinking what I'm drawing, and why am I drawing this face and not like trees, for example. There is absolutely no answer to that. There, you can use all your signs to try to describe the process and the outcome of it, but there is no ultimate answer from science to this.
Yeah, and I think there doesn't need to be. Like, I think that's not the field of science. Why should science go there? But I think when you were talking about the magic, I think that's exactly that what draws people, what draws what draws the attention of the audience. That there is something that they really can't explain, and it's something what really, really talks to them in some way. They didn't expect that maybe themselves either, and they meant that it maybe captures something what they feel, but they haven't realized it yet.
Yeah, but you know, the process, it is so complex and there's so many filters. It is very difficult, like, to control. Like, it is almost impossible. Imagine there is something that I don't control. And I say something because I don't know what name to put it. Like, let's say something that is on the other side of the flow state, right? Where the ideas come from, right? So there is, these ideas go into my consciousness. These filter, I have absolutely no idea, no clue how it happens. And then from this consciousness, my psychomechanic, let's say, if that exists, goes from that consciousness to my hand that actually holding a pen, and this is actually printing something on a paper, right? That definitely will never have the exact shape and form that it's in my brain, because it's another language, literally, completely. I have an idea in this world or universe of ideas, and then all of a sudden there's a hand in between. Hand speaks another language, so there's like just in me there are like two filters, uncontrollable filters, right? So then there's a paper that is printed, and I show it to you, and there's also like 3 other, like the filters of your eyes, all your experience, your background, who you are, how you see it, how symbolically you project it, if that is the case, and so on and so on. So how the heck am I gonna control something exhaustively throughout the process? I can some attempts, if I gather a lot of information about like taste and blah 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 and technique and composition and a lot of tools, I can make my images a little bit more appealing.
Why would you say the control necessary? Like, why did you brought it out that it should be controlled?
Of course it should be controlled. Do you think that the best art in the world that is part of history, it has been made by chance, like just like out of control?
No, but that there is this like a training, like years long training where we spoke before. But then I think still that there is a room for coincidence, and there is room for, as you say, the magic.
Yes, but the magic happens in between what lies on the other side of the flow state and my consciousness. That's where the magic happens. The rest. And for these magic to happen, these both of sides of the flow state, if that I just depicted in this way, I'm not sure what I'm talking about. They have to talk the same language. So you have to be a painter, or you have to be a drawer in order to create something that is a drawing. Because I could start singing, and I would need to sing in order to be creative in singing. I mean, so meaning I just meant that like Michelangelo had to really, really think. So both sides of his creative process have to be either whatever. He was like an architect as well, like, but let's say a painter, right? When he painted the Sixtine Chapel, do you think that all that was by chance?
Absolutely not.
So do you think that there's been like months and months of insane, let's say, investment of resources of all sorts, spiritual, in these let's say constant dialogue of consciousness and unconsciousness to see what is the best image that fits the purpose, but you don't know the purpose. You know the objective that you, in this case, he needed to paint the Sixtine Chapel, right? But that painting changed the history of the world in a way, in which now, like, let's say painting it's not in a position to change anything anymore. But that was the usage of it, because at the end was the media where George was somehow depicting some spiritual things and as well propaganda. So in a way, art was used as a tool for things that were not related to art itself. But the artist itself, he was, in this case Michelangelo, he was really performing. So it's definitely not by chance, not at all.
So it's because I was asking like why you think that all these individual parts needs to be controlled, and I think what the science studies in art is it's exactly that. It just looks only one individual part at the time. So for example, why do the dancers do like millions and millions and millions of pliés or jumps or this? It's not actually, like, from the neuroscientific point of view, it's not to train the body to do the exactly same thing, because on every time you do a plie there is a tiny variation. So basically what from the neuroscientific point of view, you train your body to react these kind of like micro surprises what happens.
But these micro surprises, not even the most attent or aware dancer can make a difference. That's the point. And maybe, well, in the case of classical dance, maybe it makes a difference, but in painting it definitely doesn't make a difference in a way that sometimes like just like a stroke out of place, it just changes the whole expression of a face that you're painting, right? Yeah. But what if there is no face? What if there's just like pure abstraction? Then whatever the outcome is, just because there is no model to compare, it's just valid. It could be whatever.
Absolutely. And I think that's also can be frightening.
I think, unfortunately, humanity for the past half a century have taken this as an advantage. Because it's not, that something is uncontrollable allows many people to create a lot of really cheap art to be sold to people who want to buy it, compared to art that was done somehow with some kind of virtuosism. That doesn't mean that today it's not there's no art with virtuosism. That is not the point. I think that there are more artists now than ever before.
Yeah, and I think also like our taste is developed also related to what we are exposed to. So if we are exposed to kind of art which maybe doesn't show that kind of virtuosity or master of skills, that's not something we would expect either. So then the masses, if we look from the wider audience perspective, then they kind of maybe just expect some kind of simplicity, or they expect some kind of like shortcuts or easy solutions, one could say, because that's what they are trained to. That's what they have trained to perceive.
Well, imagine that is something that a friend of mine said once in a conference. You go to a museum and you have an audio guide, right?
Yeah.
You go to El Prado, which is the biggest pinacothek in the world, and they give you an audio that explains absolutely everything about the paintings, right? Which from one side it is okay, right? That they contextualize this what you are looking, but that's not the aim of the artwork.
Yeah.
That you don't. The audio guide is not letting you be part of the art.
Yeah, and with the audio guide, you would never ever get the Florence experience which I got when I went to Prado last time.
You mean the Stendhal syndrome?
Yeah, it has two names. Because he got his Stendhal, he got the
experience in Firenze.
Yeah, yes. Florence. But so if there is someone rationally explaining to you all the time what you should experience and what you should see,
the audio guide is telling you just go Rembrandt, the Night Watch. Well, the Night Watch is not in El Prado, but doesn't matter. And this painting was made by Rembrandt in 16 blah 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 and so on, and depicts how the Prince of whatever and blah 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 and so on, because blah 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 blah, and it gives like a lot of data and a lot of analysis and a lot of blah 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 blah. But at the end, you are not actually closing the circle of that experience that art is supposed to transmit to you. There is no art if there is no audience, and with an audio guide, half or just to say a number, just a big share of the audience experience is gone.
But could you imagine that, let's say a couple of centuries ago, people would have needed this kind of audio guide? Like, no. Is this audio guide something what it's like very typical for this time where we are living in?
Yeah, well, just most likely because education was more exclusive to less people, let's say. who could afford an education. And in a way, painting, and I'm just talking about painting, probably music as well, like classical music was performed by for and to and by people with a certain education. So there is a cultural frame and intellectual frame as well. So I think that many of those who were the audience of that kind of art were the only ones who could understand it, because the rest of the population was completely illiterate.
But if we think about the churches, for example, where most of the arts was presented, there were a lot of, like, let's say, lay people going into the church, and they could still enjoy and appreciate the art.
Can you imagine a peasant that lives in the Middle Ages, and he lives in a hut with 10 kids, and he wakes up every day at 6 a.m. to go on labor, and one day he goes to he's put inside a Gothic cathedral. Damn it, that is not the representation of God on earth. That's why Gothic was made like this. It is a direct punch to the audience. This is where God lives. And you could feel it.
Exactly, you could feel it. So then there is no room for the audio guide.
No, you don't need it.
Exactly. So why do we need it in this time where we live now?
Well, because we live immersed in a myth in which science plays a role.
Which we were talking about that last time. This is what I was a little bit after. Like, how have we somehow gotten more maybe distant from our, let's say, to our ability to observe. So
what happened to Adam and Eve at the end? They ate the damn fruit and they couldn't go back to the paradise. So there's no turning point. So we will keep, understanding the world in this way. There's no way we can't, because we all are educated in the same way, in a way. We can't erase our brains.
We can't erase, but could we add? And this is what I talk a lot or think a lot through the wise motion, like the embodied approach to cognition and our emotions. Like, could we then somehow re-educate ourselves to be in a connection with the environment and with the art and with other people in a different way, which is not strictly speaking only rational.
I'm sure, but what you pretend is that we feel the same thing that a peasant of the Middle Ages would feel entering a Gothic cathedral.
Well, this is not, of course not.
It is not possible.
No. And we live in such a different environment, so even if we started to change in design...
To start with, we don't believe in God anymore. Like, as a society, let's say God is not ruling. I mean, there's part of societies in the world that is still ruled by God, let's say the metaphysical God, or other gods, like whatever. But this is not what is driving the world nowadays. The experience of getting into a Gothic cathedral inspired, it might be one of the most beautiful craft that mankind have ever done, just for the fact that it took like 100 years of the best experts on many fields to build it with the best materials and built to last. I don't think we can appreciate it in many other ways.
Yeah, and that's why we go and try to explain the artistic experience with science. Like, there's this new field of neuroaesthetics that you try to explain on the neuronal level about the artistic experience. So maybe that's also that we are somehow confused, that we are somehow touched of the art we see, and then our contemporary way of treating the confusion is going and trying to explain it with science.
Yeah, but imagine, like, in painting, for example, there hasn't been many new creations, let's say, that are genuinely new in a way. That they are, because technically or philosophically, everything that it's newly produced is new, that's never been done before. But which was the two latest relevant inventions in painting at the end, if you don't consider like the materials, in the past 10 centuries, there's only been two inventions in painting. One, it would be the abstraction, and the one before, perspective. So it is very difficult to explore new ways to do it. Yeah, I think it's possible, but it's we live in a period of time in which all possible styles are okay. Yeah. Which never happened before.
Which came when we came down from the modern time when art and science had gone very, very specific, let's say, and out of reach of the ordinary people. And then how we came down from there is that we kind of messed everything up, and then tried to start to understand the very complex environment with fractions.
But all these noise with no values in which you can quantify. Because at the end, even nowadays, you go to Florence and you can quantify that David's sculpture, it's a punch. And if you, on top of that, you think how it was done, like one only block at that time, just to carry the block from the quarry, at that time, it requires some really, really advanced technology to do it, and a lot of will, and probably many people died doing that. And but there's no, in a way, there's no how do you say that? There's no discussion that sculpture, it is a masterpiece. But nowadays, as I told before, there are so many styles now on active and, let's say, valid, that there's so much noise, there is no way for us as individuals to quantify our way of perceiving, way of feeling, way of putting ourselves as an audience in front of many artistic expressions. That is really difficult to me. I don't know. I mean, I don't think if that is even possible.
But is it that then as I said before, that we're kind of in a way learn to like that what we are exposed to, and to which style we kind of create, let's say, pleasant emotional memories, so then we are more drawn to go to that style. So then even though there's this vast variety of arts, we still have a tendency to go towards similar kind of art. In each individual, and also when we talk about the masses, also as a collective, we have a tendency to go towards the similar kind of art.
What do you mean, exactly?
Because you were talking about this, how it gets all there's just so much offering and everything is so different, and I think then still there are kind of audiences, very different audiences who find the meaning in these different fields.
Yeah, of course. I mean, taste in a way gets specific for the vast majority of people. But you have to understand something, that it just breaks all the equation wherever we talk about art is no longer art anymore. It is entertainment, and as an entertainment, there is everything is possible because it's just made to entertain in a way. Just like entertainment, it's something that happens when you're not working. So time is divided. Time and how we feel, how we do, blah, blah, how we see the world, how we position ourselves, blah, 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 and so on. It is very difficult for us to change these concepts.
But I think there are still, I don't know if they are in minorities, but there are still people who want to see beyond and who are looking for something beyond the entertainment. And I think that's something what keeps certain fields of art going.
Yeah, but this is just 0.000000001% of the population.
But as you said, that if we look at the past, I don't know how many thousand years, there were 500 people who actually were able to change something, bring something new. So maybe then that small population, if it keeps going, maybe that's enough.
I don't think anymore that the paradigm we're living now, it is that the individual has the heaviest weight in history, let's say, as we have been. Now everyone has much more responsibility on their own than any other time period on Earth. So we need to pay for everything. So we are not living in the Middle Ages, in the feudalism anymore, where everything was somehow provided by someone else. And then we had somehow with the state, with the creation of the state, like father state plays a big role on the past 50 years in a way that has never done before. But still, we all know how to write and read. Do we all consume culture insanely? How many exhibitions do you think middle low class men and women would have been in the late 19th century?
Yeah, and I think that was just out of their living circle,
And how many galleries there were, and how many movies do you think that people were actually? Well, actually in Barcelona there were 100 theaters in the 1920s, but which was the city with more theaters in the world. But still, cinema was made at the beginning to entertain the masses. The art of cinema was something completely different. I think. Yeah. And there was the intellectualism, let's say, if you want to call it that way, was somehow very parallel to it. There was theater for it as well.
Which is still quite a lot the case. If we look at the film industry. And when we were talking about the entertainment, I think a big percentage of the movies are created from that perspective.
99.999, except some independent, rich Polish filmmaker.
But then bringing a big theme here at the end, okay, why is that? I think the entertainment doesn't really reach our kind of elements in unconsciousness which could be brought into the surface. So it plays more on the superficial level.
No. If you look at all the artists that are nowadays performing on a big level, on a high level, just let's say painting, for example, they have implemented the culture where they live in. For example, comic books. Liechtenstein started to use comic books in his paintings, and that's why he became famous in the 1950s, 60s, so on and so on. Sorry, 60s, 70s, yeah. But nowadays, the usage of comic book characters, it is not something strange among influences of many, let's say, relevant painters. For example, Murakami, which is not only one of the most expensive painters or artists in the world, but it's one among the 100 most influential people in the world. He bases all his work in manga style artistic productions. And I say artistic productions because he not only does painting, but he does installations, he does sculpture, he does even merchandise, right? So before, Van Gogh was not into merchandise. Well, poor Van Gogh, let's say, I don't know. Courbet was not into, who was the genius of marketing, let's say, to put some value that it's not, let's say, symbolic of value into his artistic creation, right? In which was actually making the price to rise instead of, because symbolically, how do you judge that, right? You can symbolically judge the Sixtine Chapel, that it is symbolically unique of a kind in human history and human mankind, so then it has probably the highest symbolical value. But something that I create, how do you value that? I mean, because nobody knows me, and I don't, if I draw something, immediately there's no like millions of people knowing what I've been drawing. So I need to value my stuff in another way, that it's not merely symbolical.
And what are these other ways of valuing?
Well, there's the market value. And market value has to do with, for example, notoriety, in a way, like fame. It's one of the market values that is useful. Materials, how much have you spent and how much the materials are and so on. And there are multiple variables that creates that, let's say, market value. I mean, in painting, for example, which collectors have bought your artwork, where have you exhibited, with whom you have collaborated, which famous media have put you into an article or into a film or whatever, etc., 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 etc. You know, that is your market value. That has absolutely nothing to do with the symbolical value.
Yeah, whereas the symbolical value might be interesting for this like small percentage what we were talking about, like who kind of look art beyond entertainment, and that approach, maybe we can talk about that in the next podcast. But I think that mystical approach and the role the unconsciousness plays in art making, that might be interesting to discuss as well, even though that's maybe not so market-driven approach at the moment.
Yeah, we can talk about it on the next one.
So thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.